Commonwealth of which I live does a annual survey to understand how healthy everyone is, mentally and physically and all this other stuff. And they do this by random phone surveys. So they call up people throughout the Commonwealth and they ask some medical questions. And it's all anonymized and everything, but they ask these questions to get a sense of how many people are having these various issues and how widespread this stuff is, so they can get an idea on how healthy the Commonwealth as a whole is, and they can track different sorts of trends in key, metrics or whatever, key issues that arise. One of the questions they asked during that phone call, during the survey, was whether or not I had ever been the victim of sexual assault. And of course, I was just like, no, 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 of course not. And they said, well, that's great, but we do have to, I am required to, define the term for you before I can record a response. I was like, oh, okay, all right, sure. And so they gave me a definition. Now, I don't remember the exact wording of the definition because um, it was kind of a difficult conversation at that point because they gave me this definition and it was one that made sense to me, as in, like, if any woman I knew had said, oh, I'm not sure if this is sexual assault or not, I would have understood this definition to be the way we should, define it, which was very much a, if there has ever been a active attempt or successful attempt to carry out sexual activities that I either did not consent to or felt that I had no option to decline consenting to. It was something along those lines. And like I said, I would have known that that's a sensible definition if any of the women I knew had asked me about their own case. But in my own head, because of cultural pressures and things like that, I had initially operated, when they asked the question, on the assumption that it meant like someone physically like fights me and I am fighting them off and they, overpower me and do whatever it is that they're going to do while I'm actively trying to fight them or whatever. Like there's a much more limited definition in my head for this to apply to myself. And so when they gave me that definition and said, this is the definition that you need to use to answer this question, I just kind of sat there in silence for a moment, and they were like, are you still there? And I was like, yeah, sorry, I'm still here. And they said, so should I record your answer as no then? And I said, no, you shouldn't. Because if that's the definition that we're using, and I kind of I understand that it's probably the best definition to use, then the answer is not no. April is Autism Month. It's um, autism awareness or autism acceptance, depending on who you ask, apparently. And I've been seeing a lot of videos about that on my For You page, and I'll probably make some myself related to that. But it's also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I haven't seen anything about that. I haven't seen any videos discussing that. And that might be partly because of just the nature of the For You page that TikTok shows me and the communities that I have kind of gotten involved in since getting here, especially the research I've been doing since my autism diagnosis. But but it is also that, and it's a topic that I think is not given its proper weight in a lot of ways, especially this side of it. Obviously, there's a lot to be said about it in general and the ways that it affects, you know, uh, the the ways that women are overwhelmingly targeted, and the ways that trans people are, disproportionately targeted. To the point, I think I saw a thing earlier, it was saying that like 50% of all trans men have been sexually assaulted in some way. Like, that's an insane number. And it's these different demographics and these different ideas, and how easy it is, especially with the way that people avoid saying, even just saying these words on sites like TikTok. It's so easy for these discussions to not happen and for people to not hear that definition. And because of the cultural norms that I grew up with, that I was surrounded by, I never would have asked myself if those experiences were harmful to me in some way, and I never would have seen the ways that they were impacting me, um, because they were traumatic, and I didn't have any tools to do anything with that trauma, as long as I didn't acknowledge that they were traumatic, that they had happened, as problems. As long as I just treated them as weird little stories, or as long as it was seen as, this time when Lucky Tej had this woman who was all about him. Um, so I just wanted to put that out there and say that these these definitions we use, these ways we talk about this, it needs to be something that enables us to stop and say, wait a second, what does this actually look like in practice? And who all does it affect? And how many people is it affecting that we don't necessarily see as victims, and that we would not assume have experienced that, and who themselves don't realize that that's what they've experienced. Um, so if that definition is new to you, if you haven't ever applied that definition to yourself in that way, um, I would encourage you to stop and do that. And maybe, hopefully it will still be like, yeah, well, I still haven't experienced that, and that's great. I hope that that's the case. But if it is the first time that you realize that maybe it maybe you did experience something that you didn't entirely realize was a problem, um, this would be a great time to look for resources on that.